first part because we can't do the roll call or approve the minutes. And then we'll do the International Airport JPA. These are both informational, so maybe just to keep you from having to be here all night or losing the quorum at the other end. So Tom, would you like to go ahead and do the radio? And I think we will go ahead and record this part, and if there is no meeting, there won't be a recording.
Send a copy to my mom.
Okay, thank you, Tom.
Tom Myers, ISD, primarily pertaining to the Skylawn radio site relocation project. As most all of you have known from prior presentations, this has been a very long, slow project. And unfortunately, I'm not here with the best of news, and that is when we went into the county to pull our final permit, we were notified by them, along with some notification from Verizon, who's leading the whole relocation project, and North Star, the owners of Skylawn, that there's a number of changes that, as they're incorporated, are most likely going to cost the county more money. So first up, I'm going to say I won't have those figures probably until June. Another piece of related news, the costs were to be distributed amongst three players: Verizon, AT&T, and the county. Late last night, I was notified that AT&T had just dropped out of the plan. And of course, my first reaction was, well, does that mean we're splitting the costs two ways now instead of three? And Verizon stepped up and said they would cover 2/3 of the cost, still leaving the county with the original 1/3 cost. So that is good news. And they stated, at least verbally, that their intention is to find another carrier to partner with them on that site. If you have the memo, I apologize, it didn't get into the official packet. But in part of going to the county building and planning, they came up with some additional landscaping we were not expecting, along with some irrigation and drainage that go along with that. We still don't know what it's going to cost to have PG&E move their master transformer to the other side of this big field from where it is to where it needs to be. And the fire marshal has required us to install a fire suppression system, which was not ever in our original budget, into the radio shelter. Those are the main items. We've known about needing to put a finish to the road. Some of that's already in our budget. There's some electrical that's not stated here that we were aware of that's in our budget. We're still waiting for a final cost on. And so, not the best tidings, but I expect to have the final figures probably within June, and I'll make sure that we bring them as accurately as possible to the July ESC meeting. Questions that I can?
So welcome to your first meeting.
Oh.
But, this has really been a moving target. It's really unfortunate that, they're coming up with more things down the road. I'd be curious, I assume we don't have any costs associated yet with the fire suppression system and the PG&E transformer, so we're,
Yeah, the PG&E, I'm completely off, no idea. And I guess I'd just rather not take a guess than
No, I appreciate that.
until we actually have some hard numbers. Now, we still have unused about $60,000 in our contingency fund, and we still do not know if we need to put in the retaining wall, which I think is 25 or 30 grand. If we don't need to put the wall in, we gain that money back. Also, we don't know whether or not we're going to need to do more grading and compaction of where they've dug up the soil. And so we have money set aside for that activity. We may not need all of it. So I'm not saying that whatever these costs are truly over our budget, but we'll try to mitigate them the best we can.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Any questions for Tom? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Then we'll go ahead and hear about our San Francisco International Airport JPA ESC update with Jim Sacco and Doug Yeakel from the SFO.
Hi, my name is Jim Sacco. I'm the county's budget director, and I think we have some good news for the council. San Francisco had actually approached us back in June of last year and wanted to talk about a couple of things. One was a new hotel that they're building at the airport, a Grand Hyatt Hotel, and the other was their interest and in contributing to the JPA. Didn't want to become a member of the JPA for a number of reasons, but definitely wanted to contribute. So we had to come up with a methodology that not only worked for us, but also worked for them and within the FAA guidelines that they're bound to. After discussing the options with them, several options actually we looked at, we came up with a formula that's based on the unreimbursed cost for the dispatch, 911 dispatch, and multiplied that by the airport's percentage of the call volume for 911. So essentially, this worked for the FAA because one, the airport's percentage of the call volume is a measurable number, and the net county cost is also not only a measurable number, but it's also unreimbursed cost. So the airport isn't paying something that's already been reimbursed by another party. Based on recent actuals, looking at both sides, the net cost of 911 dispatch and looking at the call volume numbers for the last few years, it looks like it has generated about $160,000 a year, and we've actually capped the agreement over 5 years at $1 million. And the agreement starts July 1, 2015. So once it's actually approved by the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, do you know if that's this month or next month? Oh, it was approved. Okay, I didn't know that. It's been approved, so we will start invoicing the city, and we expect to get about $160,000 or maybe more for the current fiscal year, and then the next 4 fiscal years. But my estimate is that we'll get at least $800,000, but certainly probably more than that based on increased costs due to salaries and benefit COLAs and other things like that. So that's my what I have to say. Doug Yeakel is here from SFO, and we're here to answer any questions the council might have.
Does anybody have any questions? I mean, that's a great job. We really tried to get San Francisco Airport to be part of the JPA, but for some legal reasons and all, they really couldn't spend the money in a certain direction. And this was a great compromise. And in fact, truthfully, we probably got more money out of it than we might have had we done it the other way. But Doug, thank you for your efforts. And I did read that your board did approve it as well. So it went it took a little bit of time, but the approval process was very smooth. So, and Jim, thank you for working on this for us and getting us something for the Emergency Services Council. Great job.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Okay, well, we now have a quorum. Ian, welcome. So I'll go ahead and we'll do roll call. We'll start all over again.
Atherton. Belmont.
Present.
Brisbane. Burlingame.
Present.
Colma.
Present.
Daly City. East Palo Alto. Foster City. Half Moon Bay.
Present.
Hillsborough.
Present.
Menlo Park. Millbrae.
Present.
Pacifica. Portola Valley.
Here.
Redwood City.
I'm here and sorry for the delay.
San Bruno. San Carlos.
Here.
San Mateo.
Here.
South San Francisco. Woodside. County of San Mateo.
Here. Okay, thank you. Hopefully everyone's taken a look at the minutes, and if they had any corrections to the minutes.
I had a comment.
Sure.
I talked to staff. Several of us were at the League of California Cities, so I was hoping that we could put excused for those of us who weren't there, so it doesn't look like we just forgot.
No, in fact, we talked about that as well, and we're going to make that a practice. We haven't done that in the past, but if people are more comfortable with that, we're absolutely happy to do it. The other thing I might suggest, and I think we'll send out a memo, is for people to RSVP whether they're coming or not, because I'd rather know before everybody gets here that we don't have a quorum if we don't. Most times we do. This was a first where we might not have, but now we do.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's, so is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. The consent agenda and the operational area report, Lieutenant?
Good evening, Board. I'm Lieutenant Paul Kunkel. I'm with the Sheriff's Office. I'm the Director of your OES. I know we're pressed for time, so I'll try to be brief. This past quarter, we had 12 search and rescues, 34 bomb squad mutual aid requests. That's a little high, but that's due to all the bomb sweeps for Super Bowl 50. We had 1 SWAT activation. We trained and gave 23 presentations countywide. We had 1 EOC activation, and that was for Super Bowl 50. And as a final chapter of Super Bowl 50, it went very well. We had no issues in our county at all. It was a tremendous effort by a lot of people. We enjoyed great support from the cities, and I wanted to thank the cities for the support from their police departments and from their staffs. The county executive staff was very supportive of us. The county manager and all the deputy county managers came by that day, and as well as our executive staff at the Sheriff's Office. So that's it for Appendix A. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions for Lieutenant? Okay, seeing none, thank you for keeping it brief. Okay, Sue, welcome. We will move into, Sue, just so you know, just for sake of time, so we keep the quorum, because some people have to leave at 6:30. We did give the presentations on the radio tower and the International Airport JPA. So if you have any questions, we'll be happy to fill you in. So we'll move on to new business, fiscal year 16-17 budget update.
Good evening again. I'm just going to introduce Narayan there and give you a quick overview. As you'll see, we asked for some increases, some of which could be viewed as significant this year. The reasons for those is we had increased employee costs. We reclassified one of our employees who I think we did rightfully by that person. They've done a tremendous job over the years, and we reclassified them, so there's an increased cost associated with them. We're paying for a warehouse that that we never have in the past. So in the past, we've kind of skated on that. We have a tremendous inventory of equipment that we have to keep locked and under a roof, and we now, going forward, have to pay for that. So there's an increase in that. We've been deemed by the state of California as a special district. We've always operated as a JPA, and that came from the state controller's office. At the direction of the finance work group, I discussed that with LAFCO and county council. They both agreed that we probably are not a special district, but because there's no benefit in fighting it, we're going to continue being recognized by the state as a special district. We do not fall under LAFCO's jurisdiction. The only difference with the special district and the JPA are we now have to turn over our finances to the state every year, which I think is good for transparency. And we have to do an audit every year, which is obviously is an additional cost for us, which I also think is good for transparency. The other addition to our budget this year is the hazmat costs have gone up. Battalion Chief Thrasher will address all of that shortly. But I'd like to introduce our finance manager for the Sheriff's Office, Narayan Nair.
Hi, good evening. In your packet, you've got the budget that I prepared with the narratives, and if you had a chance to go through that, I'll answer questions. But apart from that, one thing I'd like to mention is one of our costs went down this coming year is the North County Fire contract is going to go down by $40,000 to $266,000. That's the savings going into the next year. And one last information that I got in last week was we got $160,000 from the airport that has been included in this budget that I've used to keep the contribution flat next year. And the total increase in the budget was $180,000. So $160,000 was used from the airport revenue and $20,000 from the reserves. And you have a reserves a spreadsheet which shows what we started this year, which is about $292,000. This year we're anticipating we're going to save about $105,000. So that'll be added to the reserves. That'll bring it to about $398,000. And then if you use 160 of the reserves, add 160 of the airport revenue, it comes to about $599,000. And then take $180,000 to cover the increase of next year's budget. That'll bring it to $377,000. And as you might remember, last year we put a cap on the reserves of 300,000. So we'll be over the 300,000 reserve at the end of next year. So we can decide at that time what we need to do going forward. So the budget, next budget has increased by $180,000 to a new $2.6 million. Of that, 130 is for OES portion, and 50 is for hazmat. And hazmat 50 is the one that's the Belmont fire contract increase, 10%. And currently we have reserves sitting in two different departments. OES portion is with the Sheriff's Office, and the hazmat portion is with the Environmental Health. We'd like to sort of open a trust account and put all the reserves into one account so we can better manage that. So, so those are things that's in the budget that I prepared, and the narratives have got all this information. So, from this budget, I'd like the council to sort of approve the budget as submitted, unless there's questions on that, and authorize the Sheriff's Office to contract with Messias Gini to contract for the audit of the JPA account or the Special District account, and authorize the Sheriff's Office to set up a trust account to sort of house all the reserve funds. So if you've got any questions, see if I can answer.
Okay, are there any questions on the budget? I wonder if we should take the hazmat one. Do you want to do them separate or take them together? Because we approved this one, we've approved the hazmat, and we haven't heard from the hazmat. I just think it's important for people to understand why the increase.
We can wait.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and, before we take a motion, let's talk about the hazmat budget update.
Madam Chair, Council, thanks for having me. I'm Kent Thrasher. I'm Battalion Chief with the Belmont Fire Protection District, and also am the one in charge of your hazmat team for the county. So as you all know or may not know, hazmat response has been provided by Belmont Fire Protection District since the mid-'80s officially to the county. We've been doing it for a little longer than that, but we've been officially part of the county and the response plan since the mid-'80s. For the last couple decades, almost couple decades, we've been doing it under contract with this board. So for the most part, our costs that we put in the contract, we've maintained very, very flat over the last several years, almost 10 years. We've done that to help out the county, to assist with funding as best we can. The cost of running the team is by no way reflected in this contract. It actually substantially more than what we bill into the contract. But the contract has gone up 10% this year. It's a bigger hit than usual, mostly due to increased labor costs for us. But again, it's a fee-for-service contract. The second year of the contract goes up 5%. The third year it goes up another 5%. So we've been vetted through the Finance Working Group, and I'd be glad to answer any questions that you may have. The only other changes to the proposed contract this year relate to primarily semantics. We've changed the titles of a couple of people, that type of thing. Other than that, there's very few changes along with the cost.
Thanks, Kent. Are there any questions for Kent? Okay, let me go backwards then and start with our budget, fiscal year 16-17 budget. If there's no questions, is there a motion to approve that?
I moved. Oh. And I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, let's move to the hazmat budget. Is there a motion to approve?
I so move.
Do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, that passes as well. We'll now move on to item number 5, which is our hazard mitigation presentation with Tetra Tech. And I guess we'll probably, could we maybe pare it down just a little bit to less than 30 minutes I have on my agenda?
Okay, I will give the introduction and let the contractor start filling in. Dave Pucci, Redwood City Fire. I was the battalion chief assigned to OES last year, and I have since been replaced by Chief Hartzell from North County Fire. Because of the complexity of the project, we've been shadowing each other as we've gone through this. And I'd also like to mention my co-chair to the Hazard Mitigation Steering Committee, Bart Spencer from Central County Fire, is in the back there. So we've worked together in this committee, and I wanted to give a brief update on how we got here, what this project is about, and then I'll turn it over to Tetra Tech. It was about a year ago in OES that we were talking about hazard mitigation. Every city in the county is required to update their hazard mitigation plan per FEMA, and most cities had done that through ABAG about a little over 5 years ago. San Mateo and Foster City were actually two agencies that were within the county that were ahead of the game, but most of us were looking at an arduous process of planning, a lot of duplication of effort if we all did it individually, and what we came up with was a process similar to what Monterey County and Contra Costa County did, which is have the county do an overarching plan, pointing out those mitigation projects throughout the county, and then having each city provide an annex to that plan. So we're doing one plan with annexes for all the cities, less duplication of effort, just a much easier way to do it for the cities. So we had a path to go forward there. We needed contractor support. We went through an RFP process. We were able to secure some grant funding for that, and we were able to hire and retain the services of Tetra Tech, who has quite a bit of experience doing hazard mitigation plans, and their expertise has been very, very helpful throughout this process. That's how we got to beginning the hazard mitigation process. What it essentially boils down to is we look at the county, we look at our critical infrastructure, and identify things that are susceptible to disasters such as earthquake. What could it affect the water system? Would it be more economical to repair the water system now before the earthquake and have it withstand what we expect to happen, rather than wait until later, have an earthquake happen, it's damaged, and we have an increased cost to repair what the earthquake has caused? We broke this process down into 3 phases, and all cities have been participating in this process of updating these documents, and then we pool them together, and then we put it together in one big plan. There are some very hard deadlines that are coming up, and all cities have been pretty good about it. We are definitely making sure that we try to keep everybody on task, but there are some deadlines that are coming up shortly where cities will have to come forward with their information packets so we can put it together in the plan, and those are coming up shortly, and I'll let Tetra Tech speak to that. This meeting tonight, and the reason why we're giving this presentation to you is, one, to keep you updated, but also this meets one of the requirements that is set forth by FEMA when we get a plan approval, and that is having a public meeting and having the chance for public comment as well. One of the other events that we're doing is going to be Disaster Preparedness Day, and having a booth set up there so we can talk about mitigation efforts, what the jurisdictions are doing to mitigate what we expect to happen after a major disaster now. That is the main bullet points off my list. So what I'd like to do now is the PowerPoint that you're about to see is going to be presented by Tetra Tech. They are our subject matter experts helping us with this process. They will give you the history and the nuts and bolts of the plan and how it comes together, and then the approval process that will be coming around shortly. So I'd like to introduce Rob Flanner with Tetra Tech.
All right, thanks, Dave. Well, thank you for having us. I will make this as quickly as possible. Once again, we are trying to meet a widget here. It is a public meeting, so we hopefully, if members of the public are present, we'll brief them. My name is Rob Flanner. I'm the Hazard Mitigation Program Manager for Tetra Tech. For 22 years of my life, I was a pointy-headed bureaucrat for FEMA, administering their disaster assistance programs. For the last 15 years, I've been a consultant working on response to what we're going to talk about tonight. So yeah, I've been there, done that, bought that t-shirt. What we're going to talk about, kind of give you just a little overview. I'm just going to give you some background on the drivers for planning. This is in response to a federal law, so it is pretty important. Describe the planning process that's been going on. We have a steering committee that's been organized to put together. It's done a yeoman's effort and a heavy lift on the overall project on behalf of the whole. They've come up with a vision. They've come up with goals, objectives for the plan. The hub of the wheel of this plan is called a risk assessment. Can't reduce risk if you don't know what risk is. So we spent a lot of time doing that. Alternatives analysis. What are the options that jurisdictions have? The law specifies that jurisdictions must identify a comprehensive range of alternatives. So we'll brief you on that. Just give you some overview on the next steps, and then if you have any questions, we'll answer those. We show this graphic. I mean, it's probably the most important graphic, and you got to understand, this is not an emergency response plan. It's not a preparedness plan. It's not a recovery plan. This is a very specific document called a hazard mitigation plan. And you have to understand what mitigation is. And the official definition from FEMA is there on the bottom. It's a sustained action to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property. The most important word in that definition is the very first word, sustained. Okay, we're not looking for the quick fix here. I always tell people, the sandbagging on the Red River is not mitigation. That's a response action. So when we are talking mitigation, what we're trying to do is make this circle smaller. We like to refer this in our field as the circle of life. These are the 5 phases of emergency management: preparedness, protection, response, recovery, mitigation. If we're doing a good job of mitigation, our circle gets smaller. So the whole process here is about knowing what risk is and identifying sustainable long-term solutions to reduce that risk. So keep that graphic in mind as we talk about a lot of this. The driver for all this planning is the federal law, Public Law 106-109, Disaster Mitigation Act of 2000. Real simple: no plan, no money. Okay, so a prerequisite to eligibility for what we call Stafford Act disaster assistance that becomes available after a presidential disaster declaration, or pre-disaster funding that was created by the law. A prerequisite to that eligibility is a plan, and it must be an all-hazard mitigation plan. It must address multiple hazards of concern. The law redefined what a local government is into expanding that definition to include special purpose districts. So when we look at this planning effort and who it's covering, it's not just cities. We have special purpose districts or special districts participating in that because the law defined them as local governments. And that's actually good news because now they have direct access to the funding, and they are also owner operators of our critical facilities. This graphic just kind of shows the drivers were really, you know, when I worked for FEMA, one of my jobs was I went out to after a disaster and I said, I got a bucket load of money. What do you want to do with it? 9 times out of 10, what I heard was, I don't know. Okay, I have no idea. I want to recover. I want to go back to where we were. That's not mitigation. Okay, we're not talking about recovery. If we lost a road because it got flooded out, why would we put the road right back where it was? Okay, mitigation is either armoring that road, relocating that road, or whatever. So the driver for this law was, let's think about it, the impacts of a hazard before it happens. So when FEMA comes to town and says, I got a bucket load of money, what do you want to do with it? You go, yeah, here we go. I've prioritized 15 projects. Here's what I want to do. The last thing you have time to do when you're in a response for a disaster, and Pacifica can justify this, they're going through one right now, is to sit there and think about what's the best alternative. What do we want to do to reduce risk? Because what are you all you care about is making sure people can get home, get back to work, and kids can get to school. So really what we're trying to get to is the end of the arrow there, sustainable hazard mitigation. You know, why plan? I'd be lying to each and every one of you if I told you the reason for drivers for planning is not the money. It's about the money. But there's a lot of other good reasons to do it. And I think the second bullet is the most important. It's a lot easier to be proactive than it is reactive. When we're reacting to something, all we're trying to do is soften that stimulus. When you're being proactive, you have the opportunity to sit there and go, what if? And so that's a really a key element. You know, there's a lot of things about sustainability, and it's a key element in emergency management. We're trying to make the circle smaller, but it's really about being proactive. Let's try to do this when we can do it in a relaxed, controlled environment, when we're not under duress because we're responding to a disaster. My job in this project is to make sure the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. The law is very specific. Section 201.644 CFR actually outlines what's required. It outlines what's required for multi-jurisdictional plans. We have to conduct this entire process in an open public forum. We've been advertising it. We got a website. We have our steering committee meetings are publicly accessible. This meeting right now is because we're making it publicly accessible. We have to do a risk assessment. The law says thou shall address all natural hazards of concern. It gives us the option of doing non-natural hazards. We got to identify a planned maintenance strategy. You know, they don't want this plan to just go sit on a shelf. We want to make sure it's dynamic. It's a living, breathing document. The shelf life on this plan is 5 years. So the performance period is 5 years, and then it mandates that it has to be updated. And like Dave said, you know, the prior plans for San Mateo County were performed by ABAG. ABAG is no longer doing a regional context plan, so all the cities that used to be under that and the counties are now having to do something else. This is a multi-jurisdictional plan. Like Dave said, the cities are participating. We actually have 30 planning partners, 18, the county, 18 cities, and 11 districts. We have to make sure each and every one of those entities participate in the process. We held workshops yesterday for both the districts and the cities. That was an element of that participation. The plan will actually have a functional component for each and every partner. It's what we call a 2-volume plan. Volume 1 is everything that applies to everybody. It's the regional components. Volume 2 is everything that's jurisdiction specific. So Belmont has a chapter. Hillsborough will have a chapter. Burlingame will have a chapter. And when you want to find out where your identifiable actions for each of those cities are, it'll be in those chapters. San Mateo's objectives for this were obvious. You know, okay, ABAG's no longer doing this for us. We've got to do it on our own. What's the best way we can work together so that we can maintain this plan, get it done in an economical way? That's why, you know, that's what we do. That's what we do best. We have a very, very proven process, template, and approach. So we're pooling resources. We're trying to reduce the level of effort on the whole. We're trying to eliminate redundancy. There's no sense to have 30 individual plans in San Mateo County that all say the same thing. So what are the similarities that we can share on behalf of the whole, like the risk assessment, like uniform goals? The other nice thing about, you got to think, is hazards don't stop at municipal boundaries, right? That floodplain doesn't stop at Burlingame. It goes to the next city. It goes, the earthquake's going to shake the entire area. So to have individuality, it makes no sense when everybody's going to be impacted by the same hazard. So how do we assess that in that context? So these are some of the objectives for the project. Like I said, here's our partnership. 18 city, town governments, 11 special districts. We have fire, we have community college district, we have water districts, we have a recreation district, very diverse interest. And the real interesting thing when you look at that partnership and you think about why did FEMA change the definition of local government, when we look at those special districts, they're all owners, operators of our critical facilities and infrastructure. One of the key drivers for the passage of this law was to make the nation's critical facilities and infrastructure more resilient. So FEMA said the way we do that is we expand the definition to bring these owners and operators into the equation. And it's a really, really valuable opportunity because we've really identified some really good ways to partner between these diverse partnerships. The planning area is the San Mateo operational area. So we're contiguous within San Mateo. Our risk assessment is all San Mateo. We have a work plan. We've got a script. It's a 7-phase, 10-step process that's modeled after a FEMA program called the Community Rating System. So it's a tried and proved method. And like I explained to you, the plan will be laid out in 2 volumes. It's kind of a schematic of the process. Phase 1, we organized. Who's the plan going to cover? Does every planning partner understand their expectation? I can't stress that enough. FEMA, this is not about hiring a contractor to come in and just write the plan. Each and every jurisdiction that is seeking coverage has to participate in the process. That's why we had that workshop yesterday, so that we could explain to everybody that they've got to perform a capability assessment, that they've got to identify actions and prioritize those actions. Yes, we give them all the tools and the templates that they need to accomplish that. So we organized, like I said, the hub of the wheel of this document is this comprehensive risk assessment. We've identified hazards of concern to be addressed. We have a proactive public involvement strategy. We've done a survey. We've got a website. Like Dave explained, phase 2 of our outreach will be at the Public Safety Fair next month. We've come up with goals, very comprehensive range of goals and visions for the plan, objectives that are measurable, that we're using the objectives to prioritize actions. They're all what we call linear planning components. We've got a very progressive, proactive plan maintenance strategy on how this plan will stay alive, stay dynamic over the performance period. Each planning partner will be filing a progress report every year. What did we do? You know, the last thing we want to have happen is this plan go forth and nobody apply for any money. That would be a waste of time and a waste of effort. You know, there's a lot of federal dollars out there that this plan acts as the keyway to, so we want to make sure that people are applying for the money. Like I said, we have a steering committee. It's a 10-member committee. It's a multi-discipline, multi-stakeholder representatives. We have planning partners. We have stakeholders, business, academia, representatives from emergency management. This committee has met 5 times since December. It's always the first Tuesday of every month. It's advertised as that. We have 2 chairs, Dave and Bart, and they've done awesome work in leading this group, keeping us on schedule. Yes, we write the script, we facilitate it, but the process flows through this committee, and they've been able to provide oversight. We had what we call a SWOO session, which is a key product that came out of this. SWOO stands for strengths, weaknesses, obstacles, and opportunities. We use those opportunities to identify the range of alternatives everybody can consider. And the old adage is you want to leverage your strengths to address your weaknesses and obstacles, and those become your opportunities. And that was a very, very fruitful session. And like I said, all these meetings are open to the public as part of our public process. I'm not going to read this off for you, but they wanted a vision, mission statement, and they came up with what I think is a really very nice, broad vision. It's got 7 bullets to it. It's actually very consistent with the state of California's hazard mitigation plan. The law specifies every local plan must be consistent with the state plan. So if the state says, San Mateo, you're vulnerable to something, you can't say, oh, no, we're not. You know, we will assess that accordingly, and we also have to be consistent with the goals. So this was the vision mission statement. They identified 7 goals that support that vision, and here's the goals. You have copies of those, and you know, the law specifies that the plan must clearly identify goals. We're using these goals to identify objectives. These objectives actually meet multiple goals. So like I said, these are what we call linear planning components. So we identified goals that meet the vision. We identified objectives that meet multiple goals, and then these objectives will be used by each planning partner to prioritize their actions. We want our actions to be what we call multi-objective actions. So they're linear, they stand on their own merit. Why we do it this way is it gives the plan a lot of flexibility. I would hate for Belmont to not be eligible to apply for a project because they didn't put it as an action in their plan. But if you can point to an objective, because we're using those objectives as a measure, a performance measure of our actions, you can now say, yes, we included it in our plan. So now Belmont's covered if that project comes later down the road. Oh, I didn't think about that. Or, oh, something happened all of a sudden. Oh, we had a tornado. We never had a tornado before. All of a sudden, you want to build a tornado shelter. You could point to an objective and say that that is met. Not that don't worry, I don't think you're going to have any tornadoes anytime soon.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
What if Belmont wants one and San Mateo wants one? How are we going to? We both have that objective.
You're both
clearly
eligible. Now, the
defined,
smartest thing you would
there's
do.
only so much money.
Well, each of you technically are eligible up to $4 million federal share per grant. Now, what you could do is you could partner. You know, FEMA is really big on partnering, and you, Belmont and San Mateo and Fire District 4 are all working together saying, yeah, we all want tornado shelters. And now you've pooled together, and now you have access to $12 million in funding. And you may get that many more tornado shelters out of the deal.
That's as a preventative, but if we're talking after the fact and we're both in crisis mode, how will that be divided up?
Well, keep in mind there's 5 FEMA grant programs this plan makes you eligible for. 3 of those are pre-disaster.
Okay, 3 are pre.
So 2 are post-disaster, 3 are pre. So in theory, the minute this plan gets approved, there's going to be a grant opportunity open right now for no disasters. That's what they call the pre-disaster mitigation grant program. Anybody that's eligible that has an approved plan could apply for that money, up to $4 million federal share. Yes, every FEMA grant has a local match requirement, so it's 75-25, 75% federal, 25% local. Doesn't have to be hard money, it can be soft money, so it could be in kind.
Oh, okay.
That's a great question. Did I answer it?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I just worry about when we're in disaster and who determines priority between Belmont and San Mateo, and
Well,
who's
we
gonna
get that because-
advocate, you know?
Yeah, you know, and keep in mind, some of these grants are competitive, and if 30 agencies all apply for the same pot of money in San Mateo, yeah, you guys are competing against each other. And that's why it's important to work together. Is there a way that you could identify or make your grant more competitive by sitting there? One of the key questions you have to answer when you apply for a FEMA grant is, who did you partner with in the identification of this action? Okay. San Mateo is going to have a much better shot at getting a grant if they said, yeah, we're partnering with Belmont, Hillsborough, San Mateo County, Fire District 7, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of the driver behind the multi-jurisdictional concept. Like I said, the hub of the wheel of this document is the risk assessment. The risk assessment has certain components that help us identify risk. We have defined risk for this plan as probability. How often does something happen? Times impact. The impact, people, property, and economy of San Mateo County. And we are using tools to measure that. We're looking at past events. We're looking at maps. You know, I'm sure you're all familiar with those wonderful FEMA maps. Redwood City. Yes, you're very familiar with those new FEMA maps. Yeah, we're using that to try to gauge and calibrate risk to the best of our ability. We look at frequency, severity, warning time, and we actually try to come up with this quantification of what is risk. Because now the next question is, how do we reduce that? So this is very important. The risk assessment is segmented by the 22 municipalities of San Mateo County. Unfortunately, because a lot of the models we use, it's hard to segment risk by district boundaries. Because, for example, the HAZLIS model we have uses census blocks. Census blocks don't follow districts, they follow municipal boundaries. So we will be able to do that, but we've instructed our districts, what cities you cover. So you can look at the risk results of this model or the results of this risk assessment and be able to quantify how they impact your district. So that's a real key important part. The hazards of concern that the plan's going to address, we are focusing on natural hazards, dam failure, drought, earthquake, flood, landslide, severe weather, tsunami, wildfire. We are going to profile but not formally assess other hazards of interest, such as terrorism, such as cyber, some of these other things. The reason we're not fully assessing them is it's apples and oranges, right? How did we define risk? Probability times impact. Yes, ma'am.
Gas explosions like San Bruno and airplane crashes.
That's a great point. We are looking at the airport and in bulk storage and stuff like that for petroleum products and in environmental impacts from those. But once again, these are going to be profiles, qualitative profiles, because we can't assign a probability to some of these human-caused events, right? So if we're saying risk is probability times impact, the impact is huge. But how do you assign a probability? There's no 100-year terrorism map, right? We got a 100-year flood map. We have a probabilistic earthquake zone. We know we can even assign probabilities to wildfire. But I can't put a probability on a gas explosion.
Except we've had one in 2009. So
okay.
The San Bruno gas explosion, which was a pipe explosion in a residential neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's not that unrealistic.
Oh, no, and we're not saying it's not. It's just to do a risk assessment under this concept of risk, I've got to be able to assign a probability to something. Now, you had one event. What was that probability of that event occurring? You have to have more than one to be able to establish a probability curve. So when you look at a flood frequency curve, when they say that 1% chance flood, it's based upon a curve, based upon multiple events that have occurred in an area to establish that discharge for that flood event. So you have one event.
I understand the concept of probability. I'm not from that jurisdiction, but I did work that as a Red Cross volunteer, and 8 people lost their lives. So it's very difficult to go back to community and say probability is what we cared about.
No,
so I'm just throwing that out there.
First off, we're not ignoring that. The plan is clearly doing that, but we are not going to rank risk. We can't rank risk on an explosion and compare it to something that we have a probability on. It's thoroughly going to recognize the severity of that. I can't map it. How do I show extent and location of a potential for explosion? We could sit there and say there's a pipeline. Do we automatically say every pipeline in the city is an explosion zone? It's very hard. Risk assessment is about extent and location of where is the risk. Like earthquakes, the whole area is going to shake, but guess what? Some soils are going to react differently than other soils, right? A function of earthquake is ground movement and what we call fragility of the structure. We know buildings are going to react differently. We have maps for that. We have maps for landslides. We know steep slopes and soft soils are bad things for landslides. We can map that. I can't map where an explosion may or may not. I can obviously identify a petroleum facility, but what do? Do you map a blast zone? I mean, it's a challenge, and this is the national debate on measuring risk between human caused or what is classified as a non-natural hazard and a natural hazard. We are thoroughly going to acknowledge the severity and the potential consequence. We're just not going to fully assess it because we can't assign a probability. Does that make sense? Okay. We're also going to profile, in response to some new state legislation, climate change. Climate change is a big deal. State of California thinks it's a big deal. There's two new bills have been passed. Senate Bill 379 that now mandates that jurisdictions that do mitigation plans that are approved on or after January 1st of 2017 have to address climate change and try to quantify its impacts. We're going to try to set the table for that. This plan will be done well in advance of January 2017, but that next update is going to have to be compliant with 379. So also Assembly Bill 2140 requires linkage between a mitigation plan and a safety element of a general plan to be eligible for the state match. If a disaster declaration happens tomorrow, the state actually pays half of the local match, 12.5%. If you're not compliant with AB 2140, you're not eligible for that state match, and it has some climate change language in it as well. So we're going to make sure that those I's are dotted and crossed with a climate change application.
Do you have any suggested dates for cities to get their Volume 2 mitigation plan information to you?
Yeah, we gave them a very strong suggested date yesterday, May
yesterday.
13th.
Thank you.
Friday the 13th. Yeah, and the actual jurisdictional templates are due to us by the 13th, and then all final paperwork for their annexes is due 25th? May 25th. One of the key elements of this and the tools that we're providing to all jurisdiction is a best management practice catalog. You know, one of the challenges we have, especially small cities, Colma and some of these, you don't have access to these large engineers, and you go, oh my gosh, I got landslide risk. What can I do for it? What is a best practice for landslide mitigation? We created a alternatives catalog or best management catalog. This was a result of that SWU session I told you about, where we actually asked ourselves, what are we doing well? What are we not doing so well? What opportunities do we have to do better? And then we added that to other industry best management practices across the board. The reason we do this is the law specifies the plan must illustrate the comprehensive range of alternatives that were considered. What FEMA's wanting to make sure happens, we don't want to come in with blinders on and just say the only solution is a structural solution, right? You know, we are great at trying to structurally solve problems, and you can't always do that. So what are the other alternatives, and are they more cost effective? Are they more sustainable? So we're providing that to all our planning partners to give them some range of alternatives to think about, and hopefully, like I said, that's going to be a valuable tool for as they go along. Our next steps, 13th, all annexes are due to us. We've been working on this along the way. Dave talked about the 3 phases. We've done phase 1s and phase 2s. We culminate that all together in this phase 3. Those are all due on the 13th. We will then assemble the draft plan. We have to do one final round of public outreach. We have to give the public an opportunity to comment on the draft plan. We will run a final public comment period. We're also trying to make sure that this meets all environmental, so we're doing a county-wide CEQA process that will cover all the cities. That mandates a 20-day public comment period, so we're going to run a 20-day public comment period. We are really working on like a hard deadline to try to get this plan submitted by the end of June. We have kind of a mission-critical situation going on in Pacifica. Pacifica has, obviously, you've probably all heard of an event going on, and they're not eligible to apply for the assistance yet because they don't have a plan. So we will actually be submitting Pacifica's plan components early because Cal OES has said we want to see that they're making an honest effort towards getting the plan done. Everybody asks, when will my city be adopting? We're targeting, FEMA and the state are supposed to turn around plan reviews in 45 days. Supposed to. If we submit by the end of June, 45 days puts us around mid-August. We submit pre-adoption. FEMA and the state want to see these plans before you adopt, because if we have to fix something, we want to fix it so you don't have to adopt it twice. So FEMA will issue what's called APA, approval pending adoption. We hope to have APA by about mid-August, which means you guys would all be going through your adoption processes sometime after that. FEMA approves the plan the minute we submit the first ordinance adopting it, and their preference is the county. So what we're trying to tell cities and counties, if you've got to go through a planning commission or some other process before you go to council, let's try to get it on the docket and get that done real early, so when we get the green light to go adopt, all the other widgets have been done. I would hope we have full plan approval, final plan approval by mid to late September at the latest. You know, that's all going to depend on how fast we get 30 resolutions. Yes, the districts have to adopt as well. We have a website, and this website will last in perpetuity. This is where the plan's going to be housed when it's done. We got FAQs on there, information on the steering committee, all the agendas, all the minutes. We have newsletters. We'll have a copy of the draft plan. We have links to ABAG. ABAG is still a viable player. They are still doing regional risk assessments. They are still a valuable resource, and we are not forgetting them. I mean, they were using ABAG's data for a lot of the risk assessment. So that prior plan is linked on there. And like I said, this website will be a key element of the public involvement strategy from here on out.
Rob, I have a quick question, or maybe you said it earlier. You have here listed 18 cities and 11 special districts, but we have 20 cities in the county and the county, which would...
Well, it's 18 cities and the county. So it's 18 and the county, plus, so it's really 19 municipalities plus 11 districts.
So are some of the cities consolidating?
No, well, Foster City and San Mateo did their own plan. They are not
Oh, so they're
participating in
not
this
part of
regional.
that. Okay, that's why you had me confused.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
got
sorry,
it.
yeah. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Earlier, we heard about the airport not really being a part of this board, and it seems to me that's a big hole in the county if somehow it's not included in this, because the airports are #1 employer in the county. Probably the population at the airport is as big as any one of our cities anytime during the day, and so how do they get included in this? Because one of the risks you had listed there was, for instance, a tsunami. Well, that could affect our airport.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I think by definition, the airport does not qualify as a local government under the law. Okay, it's not a taxing district. It's not a municipal authority or whatever, but they are a critical facility. And this plan has identified, one of the key elements of this plan was they defined what is a critical facility, and our steering committee did that. And we created a very robust definition, yes, and it does include the airport facilities as critical facilities and infrastructure. This plan addresses all critical facilities and infrastructure in the risk assessment, regardless of participation or not. And believe it or not, we are actually assessing risk for the non-participating cities. We want to set the table so that if there ever a point in time these other cities want to link to this plan or participate in this, the table is set for that. So there is going to be an assessment of that. Now, the challenge is going to be, let's say there's a project we identify that's on the airport. Who's going to apply for it? Yeah. That's a hard question to answer. And
If I may, that leads to two other questions, two follow-up questions on the airport. Is the airport director or their government, if you will, that manages the airport, being aware of what we're talking about today? And number two, the complexity, because the airport, we run into this all the time in San Mateo County, where because of the way we were created, if you will, as a stepchild of San Francisco, San Francisco has things in our county, like the airport, that they have jurisdiction over it in some areas, but it's in our county.
Right.
So.
Yeah, the interesting thing about that, and Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, isn't the airport covered by the city of San Francisco's plan?
That's what I was coming up to
Okay.
mention, is the airport is covered by the city and county of San Francisco's mitigation plan.
So there's our answer to the question. Now, here's the disconnect, right? We assess the risk, we identify the project, but another agency that's not part of our plan that has the eligibility would have to apply for that project. Did we invite them to participate? Yeah, they actually were invited to participate, but they declined to participate in this effort, probably because they said, we're okay, we're good to go, we're part of this other plan.
Wouldn't they have the same risk assessment? I mean, they're going to have to develop their plans similar to how we're doing ours, so their risk assessment has to be as thorough, or they don't get the money either for something that could happen at the airport, I assume.
Yeah, I can't attest to how they did the risk assessment. We're using a pretty standard practice. We're using a FEMA tool called HAZUS, which is a pretty robust tool that gives us some pretty good information on risk. I don't know if San Francisco used HAZUS or not, but you're absolutely right. I can't fathom that San Francisco's plan did not thoroughly assess the airport. If it didn't, then shame on them. But, once again, this is kind of the problem. And, where do you draw the line in multi-jurisdiction? Should we have invited San Francisco to participate in the San Mateo County plan? Well, if you're thinking of you're sharing a key critical facility and asset, maybe. But politically, that's never going to happen.
Well, but we have developed a good conversation with San Francisco Airport now, especially with now we've got an agreement to have monies coming to us. I think it might behoove us to, maybe follow up and just touch base with them and find out what they have done. I mean, I can't imagine there's going to be a whole lot different than ours because they're going to be concerned about getting money to fix things as well.
Yeah, that's, and Bart just reiterated, I hear exactly what you're saying. I think the opportunity, they were invited and declined 3 times. Okay, let's say we identify a really cool project. We identify a degree of risk on the airport, and that's a project. You know what the recommendation for that project is going to say? Coordinate with San Francisco on the implementation of this project. Because, once again, remember, what does FEMA really want in these? They want partnering. San Francisco tries to apply for that grant by itself, has a less chance of getting that project than they would if they partnered with San Mateo County.
When we partnered for Homeland Security dollars, Uwasi thing, I mean, there's a lot of things we've done together. So I don't want to make it sound like they stand out there like the big bad wolf. I mean, we do run into some issues with them just because, but yet at the same time, when they have the hotel, we're going to get the tax because it's San Mateo County. So, I mean, we get some benefits from them too. So it's kind of a give and take, and sometimes it's difficult, but we've certainly done a lot of things over time, especially in emergency services and Homeland Security.
Well, and this process is pretty onerous, I'll be honest with you. I mean, it's very prescriptive, right? You go through one process, you're not going to sit there and say, yeah, I want to go through it again. And if I was the airport district, I probably would have said the same thing. Yeah, we're good, we're covered. Now, how do we make sure that we have coordination between a similar project that's in 2 different plans? That's where I think where the implementation strategy says coordinate with. Did you have a question?
No, I was just suggesting, I think we would all like to know, we could ask them for a copy, it's public anyway.
Yeah.
A copy and send them theirs, and I think we should look at it to see if there's anything we realize would be hurtful to us if they weren't well planned. And then we could address that if that were. I think both entities should know what the other ones did come up with.
Well, we have the ability, it is in San Mateo County, to make public comment on their plan if we think something's missing. I think what you're talking about is sort of after the fact when you want, or even pre-planning, if you want to get some money, it behooves both of us to go in together because there's a lot more money in it if we do it that way. And Chancellor,
we're in that phase right now. People are identifying projects. Okay, so is that going to be in the county annex? Is it going to be in Colma's annex? I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I can't tell you who is going to identify a project on the airport. I hope somebody does. And if they do, if we see a project on the airport, I think that's where we have to sit there and say, okay, there's got to be a level of coordination with the city of San Francisco on this because they're the actual entity that has the key weight of the funding. The eligibility for the airport lies with the San Francisco plan.
and I assume they have to come up with the same probability issue.
Yep.
And I assume they can do that based on how many incidents they've had, perhaps. I mean, I think theirs would likely be fairly robust because they have a lot of probability of things happening there.
Yeah, once again, I haven't seen the San Francisco plan. Jess, have you seen the San Francisco plan? Okay. And we'll make sure that we get it. So especially on projects that are clearly identified for the airport, we can inform our body of these projects.
Yeah.
Apologies, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, and I'll get.
Just on that discussion, you mentioned earlier the shelf life of these mitigation plans is 5 years.
Yep.
So it makes sense to have that ongoing conversation. I think that's the direction that we're looking for.
I would hope that they would see the light and say, yeah, it makes sense for us to partner. I'm not sitting there saying they should be part of San Mateo County's plan. I mean, they only need one plan. They don't need two. But they are a viable stakeholder. And we have these issues all the time. We're doing a plan in Portland right now where you have an energy infrastructure hub that lies in the county that provides the entire energy for all of Portland and half of the state of Oregon. It's not in the city of Portland, but they're on our steering committee. they are a viable stakeholder, and they're not eligible on their own merit, right? They're not a quote-unquote local government, but they are a stakeholder, and there are projects in the city of Portland's plan for that energy infrastructure hub that doesn't lie in the city of Portland. Bingo. The key way to the funding is the eligible local government. So I think that's a great suggestion, and I would hope the dialogue can continue. And, you know, we can actually identify that as a strategy in the plan.
I'm coming very late to this process, but I work in the solid waste field.
Oh, okay.
So in 1989, I handled 4 landfills where Marina District solid waste came from and had to work through contingency plans. I've also done flooding, things like that. So in this, we're looking at the risks, not the cleanup. Is that correct?
Well, yeah,
So-
you know, that's that or that circle, right? Yeah.
But then you've got environment as one of the criteria. And for people in my field, our job is to keep those landfills open as long as possible and to best utilize the waste materials. So if not this study, my question then is to my peers, when are we looking at that? Because I've gone to a number of FEMA classes. I was out in New Orleans following the disaster, and one of the side effects of both Northridge and that disaster are huge piles of concrete left over, and the contractors are long gone and the money is long gone. So how do we protect ourselves from bad actors? But also, how do we, in my world, I'd love to see contingency plans. I'd love to see pre-approved contractors. I see that that's not here. So where is it?
Yeah.
Where do we do that?
Outstanding question. And, you know, it's real easy to sit there and say, this is not a recovery plan. This is not an EOP, because we are responding to a specific legislation. Section 201.6, 44 CFR is very specific to what does a plan have to be eligible for hazard mitigation grant money. Okay, so you can't apply for a mitigation grant to do a recovery project. Okay? Recovery comes from another pot of money called public assistance, PA. If you're in a disaster and you're responding or recovering from a disaster, you're going to get reimbursed for what it costs for you to recover under this public assistance program. Part of that is debris management. And the amount of money you get under public assistance for debris management is contingent on you having something called a debris management plan. Everything you just said is a contained component of a debris management plan. Where is it going to go? How are we going to monitor it? What contracts do we have in place to manage the amount of debris? And the state of California even has regulations concerning what's required in a debris management plan. That's not a mitigation project. There's no reason why this plan couldn't recommend that. But the problem is you're not going to fund that with a mitigation grant. Okay? You would have to fund that with some other source of funding. You could utilize PA, public assistance, but to get that PA money, you have to have a disaster. So I think that's outstanding. You know, the one thing about, and FEMA is all big on what we call plan integration. There's all these planning mandates. You've got comprehensive plan that has a safety element. You've got EOP requirements, emergency management planning, debris management plans now, mitigation plans, recovery plans, sustainability plans, climate adaptation plans. They all have a similar concept, right? We're all sitting there trying to say what's going to happen. And when this happens, what are we going to do? How do we integrate? So while, yes, 44 CFR is very specific to mitigation, there's nothing that sits there that says this plan could not include a recommendation for a countywide debris management plan. It just can't say the source of funding for that's going to be a mitigation grant. The source of funding for that would be a Homeland Security grant or public assistance grant or an EMPG, Emergency Management Program grant, that will fund debris management planning. Remember, we're trying to make that circle smaller, and all of those circles have a role. Recovery, response, preparedness, all of that has a role. So what we'll do is and we're going to see it. I can guarantee you we're going to see I need to update my EOP. Great, and I would not discourage it. Why? Because we have risk data in this plan that could support an update of an EOP, right? We have a risk assessment. What do we think is going to happen? What's going to be impacted? Guess what? An output that comes out of our HAZUS model are debris estimations of how much debris do we think a magnitude 7.2 earthquake on a San Andreas fault, epicentered X, is going to generate.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Do you then try to maximize recycling or just throw it all away?
That's not the job of this plan.
Okay.
That's the job of the debris management plan. Okay. And once again, we're not trying to, create, I like to always use the adage that the cross-training shoe, right? Cross-training shoe is meant to do a lot of things, but it doesn't do each of them individually very well. If you want to be a professional runner, you're going to get a running shoe. If you're going to be somebody that goes out and to work out, you're going to get a workout shoe. The mitigation plan is very specific to mitigation projects eligible for 5 FEMA grant programs. Does it have the opportunity to create linkage or integration with these other plans? Absolutely. But it's not going to have that degree of detail on something that's not even mitigation grant eligible.
Any other, Matt?
So I have two other questions. One is following up on what, is it Diane? Is that right? Yeah. Ann, I'm sorry, was asking, and that is, I'll pare it down since she asked a lot of it. Is Recology even aware of this plan? Because it's Recology, they're our waste management company in this county. I think for about 2/3 of the county, and it seems like for many reasons it would be something that they should. You mentioned stakeholders. It seems like they should be a stakeholder in the process at least.
I can say they're not. I mean, they're not on our steering committee. When we put together the steering committee, we were really trying to identify key stakeholders in the terms of mitigation. Mm-hmm. Remember, there's not a debris management component in this plan. It's not required.
However, some of those risks that you had up there, especially for Redwood City and San Carlos, because their plant is in our city and on their border, that could be a concern. And even just for the whole county, there's certain things that you had up there that, maybe we can't pick up trash and now we have a different kind of hazard because everybody's trash is sitting in their front yard or whatever. So yeah, I don't know. It just seems like they ought to be part of this and have their ear to the ground as well.
For debris management planning, absolutely. That would be a separate project that really I would be responsible for both of you there. So we can certainly engage them on that level too to prevent that disaster from being relocated to our agency. And that would be that debris management plan, which we do have partially.
Can I ask a question? I see Wayman Wong is here from Environmental Health. Do we have any of these plans in place from environmental health standpoint in the county? Or has there been talk of some of these?
Yeah, in terms of the debris management plan, we've looked into it, and this is something that we'll need to work with OES on to develop that management plan, and I don't think we have that in place yet. Is that correct? Yeah. So we have not done that. But in terms of your question about Recology, it sounds like it's more of a critical infrastructure piece of it, a component of this mitigation plan, rather than dealing with the debris management aspect of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point. If it is truly a piece of critical infrastructure or critical facility as defined by the steering committee, and like I said, the steering committee came up with a very robust definition of what they felt was critical to the planning area as far as facilities and infrastructure. If it met that, it's getting inventoried, it's getting assessed. So the risk assessment looks at what is the damage potential to that facility. And it does look at what is the loss of function. Okay, so if that facility is damaged, how long do we think it's going to be non-functional? So in that component, yeah, now you can make some correlations. We're going to have no solid waste facility for 365 days post San Andreas. Now what are we going to do? Well, then that funnels down to that debris management plan. Or if there's a project that we could harden that facility some way, that now is a mitigation eligible project.
Well, not to kick a dead horse, I would think that the two risks that we have one landfill that covers majority of San Mateo waste. That's Ox Mountain off 92, which is subject to earthquake damage, floods, road closures. The other thing is our bay is ringed by old landfills. So in an earthquake, you could crack a landfill so you can have both garbage and toxic effluent, but you can also have gas releasing. So I don't know if you've looked at that. That's something we're looking at on the sea level rise committee. But it's just something to be aware of. For all of us who love garbage, I'm happy to go offline. And 30 years in this field, I love it. We just are happy to be part of the team.
Yeah. I'm really glad to know that resource because, I mean, I would love to sit there and tell you guys that I know everything. I don't. I learn something every single time I do these plans, and that's really, really good input. We try, when you sit there and you say direct impacts, indirect impacts, we try to look at both. It's real easy to focus on that unreinforced masonry building's going to collapse. That soft story construction building's going to pancake. Yeah, and we need to think about that. But what else? Like you just said, the capped landfill that's going to go into the bay, the landslide that's going to happen over there where it used to be a landfill that's, these secondary indirect impacts. It's like peeling a layer, it's like an onion. I mean, we can just keep peeling till the cows come home. And we make every effort to do that. But, I think when we start going through the review process and we get public input, internal review, comment, that's where the actual local subject matter expertise really comes into play. So love to get your name and phone number, contact information. We'd love to get your comments on the draft.
Let me ask a question for this evening. I assume we're looking for public input as well this evening?
If there's a member of the public that would like to ask a question or be educated, we'd be glad to answer it for them.
Okay. So I guess I'm asking, is this supposed to be, because on mine it doesn't show it as a formal public hearing. Is this a formal public hearing? It is, okay. If it's okay with the panel here, let me see if there's anyone from the public that wishes to address our board. Okay, I just wanted to see if there's anybody that want to get a chance to make comment. Yes, Matt, sure.
Sorry, I did have one other question I didn't get to. We talked about the airport as, and it's something that's in our county. The other thing that I could see as an issue is where we have borders, because you mentioned before, disasters don't stop at borders. And, being that we're on the peninsula, we're bordered by San Francisco, and then we're bordered by Santa Clara County. And I can imagine mitigation projects that might cross either one of those lines. Again, one of the things keeps coming to my mind is this, the problem of a tsunami, especially hearing lately about earthquakes that have happened. And, that tsunami's not going to stop at any one border, right?
No, you're right. And Santa Clara County's in the same boat San Mateo is. They were an ABAG planning partner that are having to update their plan. They haven't started their process yet.
So who's it up to, though, to identify? You said before that, partnering is a really good way to get funding. Is it up to the county board of supervisors or who to jumpstart that process and say, we're identifying this project, we need a seawall here, and it's on the border of our two counties. Let's go get some funding for it.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, you have to look at the scale of the project, right? Mm-hmm. If the scale of the project is a fully regional project, a regional levee, a regional revetment, a regional seawall, then you'd be crazy not to partner with all entities within that region that would benefit from that project. You're leveraging the resources, you're increasing the grant pool, the amount of eligible money you can do, and, it's obvious. I mean, you do it. The seawall in Seattle, that is a joint effort between every municipality in King County that has a border on the Puget Sound. 2/3 of that project was funded with FEMA mitigation grant dollars.
Well, what it sort of tells me, and we can certainly follow up in the future, is that we obviously need to find out what our partner or neighboring counties are actually doing. So if we identify some things, hopefully they would be identifying the same things. And if we're ahead of the game from Santa Clara County, that may be a good thing because we might identify some things that we'd like to encourage them to include. So we can have those kind of discussions for sure.
And once again, I can't stress enough, the whole idea behind this plan is it's a living, breathing document. We actually have set this plan up so that if new initiatives come in the performance period, they can be added to the plan at any time through what we call progress reporting. Mm-hmm. We're not only trying to report on progress of the actions identified in the plan, we're trying to open the plan up to changes and additions. You may sit there and say, this is not going to happen. It is no longer feasible. I need to remove it. Or guess what? Santa Clara got their project done, their plan done, and they identified a regional project of significance that we want to partner on. You're going to add it. So the plan is dynamic. It will be a living, breathing. It's a lot different plan in context, the way it's going to be maintained than the prior plans were.
Okay. Any other comments from this board? There was
one last one.
Okay, go ahead. I also saw some for the audience.
Your slide talks about hazards. They're all sort of sudden hazards, and talking about sea level rise, that's a slow-moving disaster. Where is that fitting in the risk assessment?
Well, we're actually including that in our flood risk assessment because we're using that sea level rise data. The problem with climate change is the modeling capability on the impacts of climate change on certain hazards is not there, with the exception of sea level rise. We've got good sea level rise maps, but what I can't tell you is what does that do to the severity or the frequency of a probabilistic flood, right? It's just a static rise. So does that mean I raise and I can map that static rise and we can say exposure, but what's the increased frequency? Does that mean I'm going to have more 100-year floods? You know, everybody keeps thinking a 100-year flood is a flood that only happens once every 100 years. It's not. It's a flood that has a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. You could have 300-year floods in a year, right? It's a probabilistic event. And so we anticipate the frequency of these types of events increasing, but I can't map that yet. So right now we're taking best available data. We know the science is going to get better. EPA is working on a hydrograph model where we can adjust the hydrograph at 30, 50, and 100-year increments. So we can predict what the floodplains are going to look in riverine environments. We can predict rainfall. We can predict dryness for like wildfire risk exposure, but those models aren't there yet. So what we have to do is utilize where we are right now at this point in time using best available data and science to try to set the table so that as this science, and it's evolving daily. I mean, it's like computers. I mean, you buy your computer, it's already obsolete. You know, there's already a faster, quicker, whatever. The climate change science is just like that. So, you know, you're like a dog chasing your tail trying to keep up with it.
Let me have Sue agree as the last comment, and then it sounds like we will have a public comment, and I'll open that up. Sue, you got a
Pretty close to what Ann was saying is that Supervisor Pine has that whole sea level rise situation going, so we're going to have, especially when you want to know what types of plans would we have, I think we're going to get to that pretty soon.
Well, and the state of California is driving a lot. Like I said, SB 379, you know, it is actually tasked a quantitative assessment. And I called Cal OES, who's going to be the oversight, and they said, we don't even know what we're going to require. We won't know for 3 years. So right now they're saying qualitative.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to open the public hearing, and if you'd like to come forward, you had a comment or a question? Well, no, we have to record it, so you do have to come to the podium. I'm sorry.
My name's Diane Jones, and I'm a resident of unincorporated San Mateo County. And I'm just curious about a particular facet of the plan once it's done, because Volume 2 is going to have input from all the municipalities, and I can well imagine that there's going to be a wide variety of quality, so that one municipality will have a very robust plan, and another one will get so much pushback from some of the stakeholders that they'll water it down and make it vague and, you know, relatively useless. So then when FEMA reviews it, will FEMA reject it and take it back through another cycle, and therefore prohibiting grant applications and that sort of thing?
Well, it sounded to me like some of it's going to cover all the cities, counties, and special districts. One of the volumes, the second
That's
volume.
Volume 1.
Right.
I'm talking about Volume 2. So Volume 2, I think, is going to vary in quality. I'm just projecting that.
Well,
I'm thinking
I don't-
about all the different. So is that something that's going to be addressed before it gets submitted to FEMA, or will FEMA just say, oh, it's fine, because they expect that kind of quality difference?
I'll ask Rob, since he worked for FEMA. Why don't you let, maybe Rob can answer that question for you? Because
that was a question I wanted to bring
Sure.
up.
That's a great question. I'm glad it gets asked, because that's the frustrating part that we have in this business, that politics gets involved, unfortunately. And I would love to tell you that, no, FEMA is not going to approve a plan that doesn't have good actions. But the rules are pretty simple. You have to have at least one identifiable, measurable action per hazard of concern that impacts you. So I could sit there and say, continue to maintain my drainage ditches to prevent flooding, and I've got my one measurable action for flood in my community, and I'm done, per the review. We hope that doesn't happen. Will it happen? Maybe. What we really care about is, are they eligible, right? You know, what we don't want is a jurisdiction in San Mateo County not to be eligible for post-disaster or pre-disaster funds after an event occurs because they're not covered by the plan. And maybe then they're driven to apply for the proper project, right? You're always motivated by what impacts you. I can tell you some of the best action plans I have ever seen developed is because we just had them. We just had an event. I actually had the misfortune of doing the mitigation plan for Snohomish County where the Oso landslide was. And guess what? Oh, that landslide risk, we had no people come to our public meeting, and we had citizens tell us there was no risk there. So guess what? There was no landslide actions in that plan. Right? We knew it was going to happen. It identified it as risk, but there was no identified landslide. Guess what the whole plan is now? And not only in Snohomish County, but King County and the county to the south and whatnot. So we are a reactionary society. You know, the best quote I ever heard when I went to work for FEMA was, "We're the best nation in the world preparing for the last disaster that happened." And it's
Okay.
true.
All right, very good. Well, thank you, Rob, for the presentation, and I'm sure you get a lot of feedback from all of us that are here in our cities and the county and the unincorporated areas. I'm going to then close the public hearing since we don't have any additional speakers, and bring it back to just general public comment on anything anyone would like to say to us this evening. Okay, if there's nothing there, then we'll move on to our announcements, and we have two of them. The first one is Community Shield exercise. Okay, it looks like Mr. Thrasher is back at us.
So I am not Carl Hess, who's listed on your agenda. Carl couldn't make it tonight, so he asked me a few minutes ago to present to you. So what the Community Shield, the Operation Community Shield is an event, an exercise. It's grant funded, and it's a multi-jurisdictional, multi-discipline event to stage and showcase the capabilities of several emergency responders in the county working together. And it'll be working on a terrorist event with a multi-casualty incident involved, with casualties, with the release of a weapon of mass destruction, and how we can respond to that. It'll entail participation from the Sheriff's Office, the SWAT team in the county, the TCAT, or Terrorism Counter Assault team in the county, fire, EMS, our transport agency, and hazmat, as well as a few others. So it's a big event. It's an invitation-only event. I believe all of you have received invitations, if I'm not mistaken. If not, you'll be receiving them shortly. Please get your RSVPs in. Also, invite your councils, back in your jurisdictions. Invite your city management. Just work with Carl Hess to get that accomplished. And it should be a spectacular event. It'll be at the Event Center. It'll be the morning of May 11th. It'll last. I believe the kickoff, we actually start at 7. We'll want people, or at 9. We'll want people there a little bit earlier, and we should wrap up about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There'll be lunch served, that type of thing. But it'll be a really exciting event with a lot of narration, a lot of explanation of our capabilities and what's going on, and it'll be a good test for us as well. Because it is grant funded, it'll be evaluated, we'll be tested, and we'll be getting feedback on what areas and things we can improve on and that type of thing. So, any questions?
Any questions? Okay. Yes, sure, Sue.
So it's May 11th. It starts at 9. We're going to want folks that are a little bit earlier than that to get you seated and get you prepped for it. And it'll last, I believe, until about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Does that include Red Cross and any of the local certs?
There may be some volunteers helping us from the local certs. Red Cross is not participating. It's not that type of event. The focus of the event is on our response and mitigation to the emergent response, the quick acting movement. So it's a bang bang, shoot 'em up, injuries. How do we take care of that right now? So I've heard rumors there'll be helicopters involved in that type of thing.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. And the next is just Disaster Preparedness Day. Lieutenant Kunkel.
If I could close the circle with Community Shield. If you do want to be invited and you have not, or you think other people in your city should be invited, contact Carl Hess. His email address is easy, chess, C-H-E-S-S, @smcgov.org. That's chess@smcgov.org, and he will take care of the appropriate invitations. And I just wanted to briefly announce that we're having our 12th annual Disaster Preparedness Day on June 11th, 2016. It'll be from 11 to 2. It's our 6th year in a row at the San Mateo County Fair.
Actually, it's 10 to 2.
Oh, well, forgive me. It's 10 to 2 then. It's a fantastic event. We bring out all of our real high-end equipment. We have experts from the best hazmat folks in our county on the fire side. We bring out CERT people. We have training for the public. We have giveaways. There's free parking. If you go to that, you're generally allowed, I believe, free into the fair for the first hour. It's a tremendous event, and it'd be great for you guys to go and show support of the emergency services in our county and go check out what exactly we have and what you fund and what you vote for and what's available to your cities during times of need. So once again, that's June 11th from 10 to noon. We hope we see you there. And if you have any questions, anyone?
And, you know, a lot of your cities are participating, some of your teams are participating, and, you know, it's a great opportunity for a lot of families in your community. So we, on most, if not all of your TV stations, your local ones, you have flyers up or on the TV stations, and we have a lot of things posted throughout the county on some of the billboards during that time. We've got ads in the newspaper for it as well. So it's a great day because a lot of families come. I mean, the fact that they can get in between 10 and 11 free and free parking brings out a lot of families, and it's terrific. We're also going to be bringing forth some other things with our Safe Schools Coalition too, to talk about safety in our schools and have some presentations there too. So it's a great event. It is my 12th year and my last. So if you haven't been, you really should, because it's a real eye opener. And most of the cities have some representation, whether it's police, fire, you know, CERT booths and things like that. It's a really great event. So
We hope to see you there. And that's all I have. Any questions? Thank you, board.
And with that, we are adjourned. Our next meeting is Thursday, June 16th.
June?
Yes. It's every quarter.
April, May, June.
It's quarterly.
Quarterly, but not always 3 months apart?
It should be. This is May, April, May, June. Oh, this.
I'm happy for either one.
No, it's usually quarterly, but there may be a reason for that. At least that's what they have here.
This meeting is very popular to have other meetings on at the same time.
Well, it's a tough one.